You're on the edge with Max Keiser. A sovereign debt crisis. That's right, government bonds. Are they about to go into free fall? Now, what's happened over the past 18 months or so is that all those toxic debts you've been reading about, all those bad bets made by the commercial banks and the investment banks that the governments bought, particularly in the U.S. and the U.K., they're about to go belly up. And we hear and we read that the AAA rated credit ratings for these sovereign bonds are now being questioned. They're talking about the UK sovereign debt being downgraded from its AAA rated status. How long before the US bonds, government bonds, are downgraded from their AAA rated status? We're going to be talking more about this with Stacey Herbert in London, and later on in the show, I'm going to be talking about the economist who saw it all coming, Michael Hudson. But before I do that, I just wanted to touch base on something I read in Bloomberg this morning, which particularly outraged me and put me completely on the edge. Okay, J.P. Morgan Chase, who's part of this financial oligarchy, part of the financial terrorists that we've been talking about on this show for so many weeks, they stand to reap a $29 billion windfall thanks to an accounting rule that lets the second biggest U.S. bank transform bad loans that they purchased from Washington Mutual into income. Remember when Hank Paulson put a gun to Congress's head and said, we need bailout money, we need T.A.R.P money, or the whole system goes into collapse? Well, here we are less than 6 months later, or 9 months later, and he's saying, oh, well, actually, it wasn't that bad of a problem. We can turn all that stuff into income for us to pay our bonuses, but you out there in the regular, people land, you've got to suffer. I've got an idea for Hank Paulson and Tim Geithner. How about waterboarding for Tim Geithner and Hank Paulson? Sound reasonable? I think so. I've got an example of how this might work. Here's my representation for either Hank Paulson or Tim Geithner. You can take your pick as represented by this pirate, and we'll see, how they can take it. They can dish it out, but can they take it? So let's see how this waterboarding and imaging experiment works. There he is. You got them all. He looks like that guy from, what's his name, Mancow. We're going to set him up. Or Hannity. I think he wanted to do this, but never did. Here, we're going to do it. Geithner, let's see what we got here. Can you take it? Can you take it? Can you take it? Ah! Can you take it? Look at that. Look at that. Look at that. He's freaking out. He's freaking out. The answer, of course, is no. They can't take it. And they shouldn't. Why are we taking it? That's the question I have. And let's bring in the financial guru from London, Stacey Herbert. Stacey, you're on the line.
Max, the financial world there looks pretty precarious. Looks pretty dangerous.
Oh, it's precarious, all right. It's very dangerous. Things are looking bad. What's going on? A AAA-rated paper being downgraded?
Well, the outlook for the UK has been downgraded by Standard & Poor's. I guess because the UK budget deficit is now 12% of GDP, which is where Turkey was in 2001 when they had to go to the IMF for a bailout of their nation.
Right. Now, let's retrace our steps a bit. Going back, this crisis, this sovereign debt downgrade crisis, how did it all start, really? Where were the warning signals?
Well, the warning signal was obviously from the billions, or if not trillions of dollars being used to bail out the banks. So what happened is they said everything was sorted, but in fact what happened was the bad debts themselves didn't go away. They were just transferred to the public balance sheet. And now the rating agencies like Standard & Poor's and Moody's are starting to worry about the whether or not these nations themselves will go bankrupt or can continue to afford their borrowing.
Well, you talk about nations worrying. Of course, the biggest creditor in the world, China, has got to be freaking out that the U.S. bonds that they hold look like they're turning into slush, a slushy blizzard. What are they saying?
Well, of course, they are very worried, according to many headlines in the last week. They couldn't have been too happy with Bill Gross, the co-chief investment officer at PIMCO, one of the largest bond dealers in the world, if not the largest. He said the U.S. will be downgraded in at least 3 to 4 years, if that, but the market will recognize the problems before the rating services. Now, China's response, according to the president of the Dallas Federal Reserve Bank, he says that, quote, senior officials of the Chinese government have been grilling him about whether or not the U.S. is going to monetize their debt.
Well, I read in the Financial Times that China is talking about their position as being a dollar trap. as if they crawled into the U.S. dollar like roaches into a roach motel, and now they can't get out. How does that dollar trap work exactly?
Well, this is the argument by some analysts in the West, saying that the Chinese will continue to buy U.S. government debt and U.S. agency debt because they can't afford not to, because they hold so many dollar reserves that they don't want the dollar to crash. So it's the Westerners projecting onto China that they're caught in a dollar trap.
Well, looking back to recent history, Japan, of course, lost its AAA rating for its sovereign debt. It didn't have really that much impact. So how is this going to be any different for the UK?
For the UK, there's a big difference from Japan in that Japan had quite a lot of savings, and they still have quite a bit of savings. So they were able to draw on their own citizens for, to buy the government bonds, to finance the debt of the government, whereas the UK relies much more on external financing for their debt. In terms of the dollar trap, though, from China, I want to go back to that, Max, because now China is continuing to buy U.S. Treasury bonds. However, they're also buying huge quantities of commodities.
Define huge.
Well, record numbers, record quantities of copper and other commodities, but they're also buying so much oil that oil traders in the UK and the US are blaming the Chinese for the current spike in the price of oil to above $62.
Right. So the U.S. has accumulated trillions of this fiat paper. China is going to be converting that fiat paper into stuff that's actually useful, like copper and oil and industrial metals. So when this really plays out on an epic scale, it's kind of like China's going to be left holding all the real stuff, and the UK and America is going to be left holding a bag of worms, the U.S. dollar. Is that basically what I'm hearing?
Exactly. They could be, while they are continuing to buy U.S. Treasuries, they're buying so many dollar-denominated assets and commodities, real things, as this fiat system collapses, that, that they will have something of value at the end of it. And it's a good way to protect themselves from a dollar crash.
How about, let me ask you this, you're in London. What about the IMF and all this? Are they going to be bailing out the UK as they did back in the 70s? Is the UK going to require a big IMF rescue package? Are they going to be rationing Marmite in Piccadilly soon?
The budget deficit in the UK is at 12%, which, as I said earlier, was the same size of the deficit in Turkey when they were forced to go to the IMF. It all depends on foreigners, basically, particularly for the UK. In the U.S., they still have a reserve currency, so they are easier able to print money. Yeah,
well, I guess the advantage of having a reserve currency in the U.S. has worked very well for them, and this is staving off the crisis, I guess, for as long as it possibly can. But it would appear as though with China, Brazil, and Russia doing bilateral deals outside of the U.S. dollar complex, that they're getting ready for that day when the U.S. dollar is no longer the world reserve currency, and they're going to start to see these things, U.S. dollars tumble, and you're going to start to see this stuff, gold bullion, skyrocket in value. It looks like Ron Paul is right. Ron Paul could be the man of the hour, the only man able to bring back a real currency to America to help them get over this addiction to phony, baloney, nonsensical fiat toilet paper that they call U.S. dollars. Fair statement?
Well, yes, Max. And, there's one other thing I have for you, which is a chart of the Iraqi Stock Exchange.
The what?
And the Iraqi Stock Exchange.
The Iraqi Stock Exchange? When did they put that up?
2004, and the chart starts in 2004.